Howdy folks, my name's Callie, coming to you live from the Wild Grit YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about some of my favorite hacks to make your suspension feel awesome. All these tips and hacks are things that I've picked up from my years as being a bike shop owner and mechanic, and no matter if you're a beginner rider or super pro, you're probably going to hear something in here that you haven't thought to try. So my very first tip is to slow down your rebound. Especially if you're a newer rider. If you're an advanced rider, you probably know what's going on. But for those of you that aren't familiar or want a refresher, basically your rebound is the rate in which your fork or shock re-extends. A fast rebound means that it's going to extend really quickly. The one problem with too fast rebound is that it can extend at a rate that actually causes problems. So let's say you hit a big divot in the road and it extends too quickly, then you might get bucked or thrown over the bars. So I highly recommend trying to slow down your rebound in both your fork and your shock. And you want your rebound settings to be fairly similar feeling. So when you're bouncing on your bike, testing out your settings, you want the suspension front and back to be feeling even when they're going up and down. If they're not even, it's going to feel like when you press down and bounce, either your front end or your back end of the bike will raise up quicker. I like my bike so that when I press down on it really hard, it's not going to jump off the floor. It's actually going to feel pretty dead. So definitely go test out trying to slow down your rebound. I recommend taking like 2 clicks off your front and your back shock, taking it for a ride, and then seeing the difference. With newer riders especially, it's hard to even know the difference, so you might have to try going all the way slow compared to all the way fast to start setting it up. On a RockShox fork, slowing down the rebound just looks like turning the knob towards the turtle, also known as clockwise. Here's the rebound knob on my rear shock, RockShox Super Deluxe. You just twist this top portion. Here's the same idea on the bottom of my Fox 40. Pull this cap off, and you've got high speed and low speed rebound knobs. Clockwise slows it down. 2, 3, 4. Keep track of the clicks. This is a Float X2. It requires a tool. Same thing though, clockwise to slow it down. Okay, so my next tip applies to anyone with a air shock or air fork that has the ability to put tokens in. Different companies make all sorts of different types of tokens. You can also call them air volume spacers, air reducers. It basically makes your suspension feel more progressive. So right here is a Super Deluxe air spacer, air token, and it goes in underneath the air can on the back shock. It basically takes up space in the air chamber, and doing that, it changes the suspension curve to more progressive. And the reason a lot of people like a more progressive suspension curve is that as you sink more into the travel, it resists a little bit more. It pushes back a little bit more. It's going to basically slowly get firmer and firmer as you get closer to the bottom out. So if you do bottom out the shock, it's not going to feel as aggressive and jarring. It's going to basically slow down the impact and make the bottom out feel a little bit better. I don't think people understand how big of a difference these things make. Every fork and shock has a different max, and so you have to do a little research to see what the max is. Assuming you have a Fox or a RockShox fork, it's really easy to figure out. You can type in the serial number or the little 4-digit code to figure out what shock you have and look up a spec sheet. I recommend going max or maybe one below max. These are really pretty inexpensive. I'm pretty sure like a set of them is like 20 bucks, and I'm not even kidding. Of all of the upgrades that you could do to your suspension, like stock suspension that is, like these make such a huge difference. They're really easy to install. Sometimes you have to take the shock off. Sometimes you can even do it on the bike. You basically pull off the air can and then clip these in, and then on the fork you unscrew the air cap. After letting all the air out, you unscrew the air cap and clip them onto the underside of the cap. I would say of all the little hacks, these are number one. Trust me. Trust me. My third tip, something you probably don't want to hear. Guess what I'm going to say? Maintain your suspension. Do people actually do this? Seldomly. Should they? Of course. The ride performs better, you wear less parts out. There's a reason that World Cup downhill racers pretty much have their stuff serviced between every race, like every practice lap even. There's two types of services. There's like what you would call lower service / an air can service, which is like the basic main seals of the fork and shock. These main seals and these main seals, the things that take the most abuse, that are basically wiping the dust off the outside of your stanchion, they eventually get packed up with dirt, and then your internals start getting infected with dirt, and you don't want dirt in there. So most companies recommend doing air sleeve / lowers service every 50 hours. And then at 200 hours, they recommend what would be a full rebuild, where essentially you take apart the entire fork and shock, all of the seals get replaced, you get fresh oil, gets recharged, all cleaned up every 200 hours. For the average rider, you get your 50-hour service 3 times a year, and then you get one 200-hour service. So try to stay on top of your service intervals. I know it's a little more than most people want to do, but it does make a difference. And now I'm going to give you a real world look at why you want to service your fork and shock regularly. Here's what can happen. Okay, so this is an old Boxer fork, and wasn't me, it really wasn't. Someone didn't service the fork at regular intervals, and you can see how the paint has actually been worn off by the bushings. So inside the fork there are little plastic sliders that rub against this, and if dirt gets stuck on them, they can wear the paint off and create scratches and grooves, so you don't get a good seal anymore, and then you'll start leaking air or leaking oil, and overall it's just not a good time. So you want to be sure to service your fork so that doesn't happen. This one, it doesn't have any grooves, it's just the paint. So I'm actually probably going to put this back together and continue to use it. But once you start getting grooves that you can feel with your fingernail, I can actually feel a little one right there. Once you start getting grooves, you are officially dealing with a shock that's pretty much blown. Can you make it work? For a while, yeah, but this is definitely a very preventable problem. And same thing with shocks. I've got a whole box right there, defunct shocks. Do you know why they're defunct? Because no one services their suspension when they're supposed to. Okay, the next tip I have, this is kind of more of a hack and kind of a weird one. I live in the Pacific Northwest, basically at sea level. But I know some of you ride out in places like Colorado and regularly do like 5,000 foot descents on your trails. When you have a really serious atmospheric pressure change, it can affect your suspension. As you go up in elevation, the atmosphere changes pressure, and when your fork is compressing, it can make it start feeling weird. Fox came out with a pretty cool little design where they have these air ports, those guys, where you can basically press them and relieve the air. Nothing. If you don't have those air ports, there is a really nice hack that you can do with the handy dandy zip tie. You take a little flat end of the zip tie, shove it in, give it a little wiggle. Looks like we're all equalized. Nice. So basically what you're doing with the zip tie is equalizing the outside world atmosphere pressure with the pressure that's inside your fork. So primarily when you're up high or do a really long descent. When I've experienced it, it just starts feeling really stiff and odd, like it's not like someone pumped the air pressure way up. Anyway, it's a small thing, but it's nice to know. So if your fork starts feeling weird and you just did a big descent or are in the middle of one, something to check. So for my very last tip, I'm going to teach you how to inflate your shock and fork correctly. This is something that most people don't know. It's a true hack. When you're inflating your fork and shock from 0, you want to cycle it. Basically, there are these little tiny channels between the positive and the negative air chamber inside your fork and shock. And your air spring floats right between the positive and negative. And when you let all of the air out at once, sometimes a little glob of grease can get stuck in that channel and clog it so that the fork or shock doesn't equalize. And when it doesn't equalize, it feels terrible. It basically, once again, feels a lot like there is too much air in your fork or shock and it's not compressing right. So when you're inflating or deflating your suspension, you want to go in intervals. So with a fork it's 30 psi and with a shock it's 50 psi. Alright, here is how you correctly inflate and deflate your fork or shock. Alright, so you remove your air cap, set it to the side. Handy dandy shock pump. This is a fork. Forks don't require all that much air pressure. We're going to add 30 psi. Close enough. Then we're going to give it CPR 10 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Alright. And repeat. 30 psi. Cycle it 10 times. 10. And cap it up to 70, my favorite air pressure. One thing I have heard is that people disconnect the pump between each time. I don't do that, and I haven't noticed any negative consequences of not doing it. Same thing with your rear shock, except it's 50 just because a rear shock generally is a way higher air pressure than a fork. You can even hear it equalize. So I'm going to show you guys real quick what that sounds like. I think it's 120. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. Suck down. Not good. Don't want that. But watch this. If you listen closely, you can hear it equalize. Did you hear that? Science. Alright everybody, thanks for tuning in. Suspension Hacks with Callie. Let me know if this was helpful or if you have any other questions. Oh yeah, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell your friends, share it with other people so I can make money so that I can go ride this thing, because that's all we're trying to do here is go ride a bike. Adios!